Have you ever wondered why boys and girls seem to develop so differently? Why they respond to discipline, encouragement, and even school environments in unique ways? And in today's world, where boys are struggling with identity, with confidence, and resilience more than ever before, how can we ensure that they grow up into strong, capable men? My guest today is Dr. Meg Meeker. She has spent over 30 years working directly with kids and families as a pediatrician, helping parents understand these exact challenges. She's a best-selling author, an international speaker, and the host of the popular podcast, Parenting Great Kids. You might know her from her book, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters, which was turned into a major motion picture. Her work is centered on providing practical, research-backed strategies to help parents raise strong, confident kids, and especially when it comes to understanding the differences between boys and girls. And in our conversation today, we tackle so many things. We tackle the real issues that boys are facing today. Obviously, I have a little bias because I am a mother of two boys, but I just was so fascinated by this conversation because we have seen such huge cultural shifts in our world that really are impacting the identity of boys today and why boys and girls need different approaches when it comes to parenting. Dr. Meeker breaks down the research on what boys need to thrive, how they develop differently than girls, how they learn differently from girls, and the crucial role that fathers play in their development. I asked her so many unique questions just around how to specifically handle raising boys when they're playing rough. What about if a boy wants to play war and pretend he's shooting a gun? I asked questions around social media, and I asked her questions about helping our young boys stay innocent and how to guard that. Her book that I read is Boys Should Be Boys, and it was so eye-opening for me. So even if you don't have boys, maybe you have boys in your life from other families, but if you are a parent of boys, I truly believe that this episode is so crucial. And also it gave me insight even just on being married to a man and the unique things that he navigates as a father. So it was just so insightful for me. If you're raising a son, if you're mentoring young men, or you're just curious on how you can better equip the next generation, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Trust Issues Podcast, the show where we question everything society tells us about how to live, work, eat, and be. I'm Erica Auckland, a mom, entrepreneur, and advocate for living life on your own terms. Here we challenge the status quo, from the food we feed our families to the way that we build wealth and well-being. You'll hear unfiltered conversations with everyone from farmers, financial experts, and everyday people who are doing life differently, all with one goal: to help you live healthier, freer, and more abundant. If you've ever felt like there's more to life than following the crowd, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Meg Meeker, thank you for being on the Trust Issues Podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Erica. It's fun to be with you.
Let's get right into it. I want to ask you, I am currently reading your book, Boys Should Be Boys. This is an incredible book. I've recommended it to so many other moms. And specifically, your research around raising boys. How is our American society set up for boys to fail?
Oh, it's huge for boys to fail, and it really starts from the time kids are quite young. Boys are quite young, but particularly in the early, I would say even preschool. When boys start entering preschool and then early elementary school, think about it. A lot of the teachers are women, which is great because they're very nurturing, they're very mother-like, and so on and so forth. However, boys act very differently from girls, and I think that a lot of teachers set their expectations for students' behavior according to the girls. And boys who are in first and second grade and third grade don't color in the lines, and they bounce, and they need to get water, and they need to go to the bathroom all the time. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think the other thing too is that, and we forget about this as mothers, the first 7 years, 8 years of a boy's life are really about bonding with mom and learning sort of their emotional vocabulary. And dads don't often teach that, but mothers do. And I think that sometimes we forget that. We teach that to our daughters. We talk about this and we talk about that, but we tend to leave boys out of the conversation. And I think it's really important because in my experience, even older boys, high school boys, are more sensitive to romantic issues than a lot of girls are. And in addition to that, so there's those two things. But we still do have a lot of dads out there who believe their son should just buck up and
Mhm.
man up, even if they're in first grade. And, just take it on the chin and don't cry and don't worry about this. But dad's approach to their daughter is very, very different. So I think that the expectations that a boy feels very early on are that I'm supposed to just be quiet and be strong and not say anything. And when I go into class, I'm just supposed to behave a certain way and not talk about it. And I think that sets boys up for, some real issues later in school and life.
Yeah, there is so much to unpack here.
Hmm.
And I think the the obvious question for me is I see how much things have changed since I was a little girl.
Hmm.
I grew up with brothers. I see how much has shifted in society and culture, the introduction of social media. So, in your research and having worked with families and children for the last 30 years,
Hmm.
it's a long time. You've probably seen a lot of
It's a
things.
long time. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's amazing. What are your biggest concerns or shifts that you have seen in how boys were raised then and now
Hmm.
how boys are being raised today
Yeah.
in 2025?
Yeah. Boys used to be outdoor people, and now they're indoor people. Video games, homework and things like this, they sit a lot more. Boys need to move. And I really think this is contributing a lot to the ADHD. Certainly isn't the whole reason for it. But boys who can't get outside and pretend they're monsters and shoot the monsters and wrestle the bears and climb the trees and take a risk of falling out of a tree, that's who boys are, and they need to do that. And one of my concerns is they're not spending enough time doing that. They're not spending enough time in imaginary play, and they're not spending enough time outside, because the easy default for parents who are very busy, I totally get it because I watch my grandkids, is to have kids sit down and play a game or play a video while I'm getting dinner ready or what I'm ever doing. And that's really just not good for boys in particular. It has a lot of repercussions. The other thing too is, my experience with social media is worse with girls, but for boys, it's the video games. It is not long after starting video games, 1 or 2 or 3 years, that they move into really violent video games. And to have a 10, 11-year-old who's playing, some of these games that are really violent is shapes the way their brain develops. I mean, it really does. And this is very dangerous. And I think a lot of parents, they either realize how bad they are and they're too tired to change it, or they just don't realize how bad they are. They'll say, oh, come on, you're exaggerating. My kid's a good kid. He is a good kid. So let's keep it that way. Because a lot of studies show that boys who play violent video games, particularly in the teen years, they become more, they have anger issues. They have a hard time controlling their temper. So it really does affect them emotionally and neurologically as far as their brain development.
It's interesting you say that. My son, obviously, being 3 years old, hasn't played a video game, but we were doing a limited amount of screen time, literally about 20, 30 minutes a day.
Hmm.
One show, Curious George. And we started to notice that whenever he'd become frustrated with something, he would say, "Ugh, I want to watch George. I want to watch George." And it became like this an emotional crutch for him, almost like a way for him to disassociate or not feel frustration. We firsthand saw how screens, just even this tiny bit of time,
Yeah.
was impacting him. We decided to eliminate the screens altogether. We did a little parenting experiment, 30 days, and the difference
Hmm.
in him was astounding.
Yeah.
His imagination, his behavior. I mean, he's still a boy, so he's still bouncing off the walls, but we noticed such a huge difference that we said as a family, I don't think we're going to go back to
Yeah.
screens. I think you mentioned something around how a lot of people say where I grew up that way and so my children, they're good kids, right? Like so
Hmm.
it can't actually be impacting them that much. Can you talk a little bit about screen time in general
Oh,
and
yeah.
what your recommendations are around screen time
Yeah.
and if parents should opt out altogether?
Hmm. Well, from my perspective, they should opt out. I will tell you because I've seen this huge shift. take place. When our kids were young, we had television. And during the summertime, we told the kids no television. If you want to watch a movie, you put in a VCR. You really don't remember the little boxes, and you stuck them in the thing. And then we had control over what they saw. In the first couple weeks of summer, they were always agitated and they were fighting because they were used to sort of being able to watch different TV. And we said, summertime, no, we live in Michigan. It's gorgeous outside. Go outside. After they got used to no screens, they got along really well. And this was interesting because they weren't fighting for time on the screen or a movie or anything. And they also began to engage their social skills, talking with one another, engaging their imaginations. They would build forts. They would go get a couple of ducks that they would buy, and they'd build them a pen. I mean, all sorts of crazy things. I think that screens tend to do several things. They are overstimulating for kids. If you think about it, they're auditorily and visually overstimulated. And the child's body's not meant to be in fight or flight all the time. You say, well, they're not in fight or flight. They are, because if you look at what happens on a screen, maybe not Curious George, it came in with Sesame Street, which is great, but here was one of the problems. Everybody jumps and moves and yells and changes color very, very, very quickly. And so this rapid pace of watching and imbibing information is really hard for kids. The other reason, of course, is kids can become addicted, like your son. I wouldn't say that's an addiction. He used that like we would use eating. I'm having a hard day. I'm going to go to eat a bowl of ice cream. That's what I do. Wait a minute. That can't be your relaxation spot. That's not where you turn to for relaxation. And I think socially, it disengages your son from you and everything around. Imagine, actually, kids have a harder time with parents being on cell phones than parents with their kids. And here's why. A kid walks into a room, dad or mom is doing their email, they're texting something on the phone. The child feels invisible because for all intents and purposes, he's not there as far as you're concerned. And so when he's on a video game, all he's focusing on is that little world. And so you're invisible to him. He doesn't have to communicate. He doesn't have to think about you. And that's not healthy. That's impacting his social skills, his ability to attach to you more, because the more conversations, the more engagement, the enhancement of attachment, which your 3-year-old is very much in still. And so that all cuts into that. So on many different levels, I think they're very harmful for them. I think if you're going to do screens with little ones, half-hour day max. The problem is once you start giving them a half an hour and they like it, they want 45 minutes or they want an hour. And then they start to beg you, and then they start to make life hard, and you've got stuff to do. So you end up, okay. And kids get sucked into using screens so quickly.
Yeah.
We do too. I'll go on
We do.
YouTube to look up, how to make a recipe, something. And in 10 minutes, I'm looking at buying new carpet. How did that happen?
It's so true.
Or buying
Yeah.
earrings off of Etsy. Wait a minute. I came here to look for a recipe. Well, now imagine you're a little child who's 3 and they go, oh, that looks fun. That looks fun. That looks fun. So on many different levels, it's not healthy for them.
I said to my husband, I noticed that the more time we do without screens, the easier that it is, because the less he asked, the less it was even a conversation. Now we don't even notice that screens don't even get turned on during the day with him. So just an encouragement for a parent listening, like, you can do it. It might be hard for the first couple weeks, but after you get over that hump, I truly think it's like they forget about it.
Absolutely. And what parents will find, and kids will tell you, teenage kids, is once they wean themselves off of screens or social media, they feel so calm.
Yeah.
They feel so good. And many of them, all they want is the encouragement to stay at it. I think we parents are so afraid we're going to deprive our kids. We don't want to argue with them. They don't want to be upset. But really, once you get past that hump, you're home free. Funny story. I mean, this is a while ago, but when our son was going off to college, we told him in high school, no video games. Now that seems really strict for now, but I just said no video games in the house. Well, I'll play them at my friend's house. All right, but they're not on my watch. And then he went off to college. He said, "Well, I'm going to get an Xbox, whatever." I said, "Okay, but if your grades aren't good, the freshman year, then we're not going to pay for the second year." So he went off to college and came to, May of freshman year, and he said, "Guess what, Mom? I just made $300." I said, "How'd you do that?" He said, "I sold my Xbox, and here's why. When I went off to college, I saw so many guys sitting in dark rooms hour after hour after hour playing these dumb video games." He said, "Thank you so much for keeping me from developing that habit." And but when we first went in and he was 14 and we said no video games, it was all out war. I mean, it was awful. I felt like, what's wrong with me? I'm a horrible mother. All his friends have this. I doubted myself. But then the payoff was so great. And once we got past the original war, he didn't ask for them anymore. And he really didn't play with them. So kids will put that up. But if you can just gut that out on the other side, it's so lovely, not just for your kids, but for you too.
I think that's like parenting as I'm learning. I'm so new at this. So I am just soaking in all this wisdom from you. But so much of that like initial hardship gets so much easier later.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about parental peer pressure
Yeah.
and
Oh,
how, that's actually the bigger question or the bigger
mhm.
problem. You say that parents want to show other parents, like, look how great I am, I'm doing a great
Mhm.
job, instead of listening to their instincts, their parental instincts. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Oh, sure. A lot of the things that we want to do with our kids, we want more downtime. We don't want them on screens so much. We don't want to give them a cell phone until they're 16, but all their friends have them at 12. And in our gut, we know, I don't want to do that. But we do it, A, because we feel we don't want to have our child left out. And B, all our friends are giving their kids cell phones. And we want to look like a good mom too, because our friends are good parents. And so we just tend, that's kind of where the train is going. And all our friends are riding the train and their kids are too. So we feel like, well, I should just jump on. It takes a lot of courage to go, no, I'm not going to do that, because you will get backlash from your friends because they feel guilty. I told our granddaughter, I said, if you can't get your kid to do something, just pay them and they'll do it. I've learned that. Bribe them with money. I said, look, because I don't want her, her parents, don't want her on social media. She's 11. And I said, you wait till 16, because that's really the time, if kids are going to have one. I'll put money in your college account every year that you postpone getting a cell phone because of, social media. Oh, that's great. And your parents are all about it. So they're all fired up. But I think that we're afraid we're going to deprive our children if we don't do what our friends are doing with their kids. And I think it's hard. Case in point, if you have all of your friends have their son on a soccer team and a hockey team, and your son is only on one thing, you feel like, well, what's wrong with me? I better get my kid in. No, you don't. You know, it's good for kids to come home in the evening and just be with mom and dad and put a puzzle together. But parents have this sense they constantly need to be engaging their kids or have their kids engaged in things in order for them to do well in life. But that's a lie. And it ends up really hurting kids and their parents' relationship. So what I tell parents is, look, if you're thinking of putting your kid in something or doing something, no matter what, and your gut is telling you, I don't think I want to, don't. Have the guts to say, my friends are doing it, but I'm not. I'm going to look like a geek. I don't care. See, it's easy for me now because I'm old enough not to care, and I'm old enough to go, no, that's terrible for your grandkid. Mothers, if you're younger, it's a little harder, but you got to do it. Those instincts are there for a reason.
Yeah, and I think that when you truly tune out the noise, you listen to your own gut instincts. I mean, for me in our home, we always say our one of our priorities is peace. And that
Yes.
doesn't feel like a peaceful life. I want my kids to grow up in a peaceful home, in
Hmm.
a peaceful environment with a peaceful family, and just trying to keep up with the Joneses. These years are so short.
They're so
I like,
sure, and there's no peace there. There's no
yeah,
peace there. And I will tell you that if parents are wound up and tense and worried and anxious, your kids
yeah,
are going to be. And so if you're anxious about what you're doing with them and your friends are this and do, and I need to work more outside the home because all my friends do, I need more money. Kids don't want it. And it and
mm,
it and it creates for a real tense home. And so cutting things, you'll never ever regret cutting things out of your child's schedule or
wow,
your schedule.
wow,
Ever.
that's so good. Okay, you've talked extensively on boys and girls,
Mhm.
both boys and girls. What are some of the fundamental differences in how you and how they are developing emotionally and psychologically, boys and girls?
Sure. Well, boys tend to develop, of course, later. Their reading skills, their frontal lobes tend to come a little bit later than girls. Boys are very visual people. If you took two babies, a girl and a boy baby, laid them on their back, and you showed them both a person's face, and then you showed them both a moving mobile, the girl would focus on the person's face and the boy would look at the mobile. They're drawn to activity and movement, and that's right from the get-go. So they're more likely to be engaged in activity kinds of things. They bond with people, parents, by wrestling, by physical attention. By you look at all boys, they're just rough and tough. Girls tend to bond with people through talking and listening and hearing and playing side by side with people. Emotionally, girls can be a little more in tune to other people's feelings, some empathy. Boys are very sensitive, but they're not necessarily in tune to other people and having empathy. That comes a little bit later in life. And so their focuses are very different. Boys are more focused on the physical. It's really true. And girls are more focused a little bit on the social, and that has an impact on brain development. It doesn't mean it all evens out, but in general, boys in early elementary school tend to be socially and academically a bit behind girls, and it's fine. A lot of parents will have their first, second grade teacher write them a note and say, your son isn't reading, something's wrong with him. We got to test him. We got to get him a tutor. You know, he'll get to third grade. And if he's not reading well in third grade, okay, get a tutor. But we get so worried that they all have to keep up, and they're very, very different creatures. So it's brain development, emotional development, different styles of living and expending energy that all affect brain development too.
You talk in your book around why it's so natural for boys to play, for example, war
Mhm.
or to want to wrestle each other. You just talked about the physicality of boys. I think a lot of parents are afraid of this type of play.
Mhm.
And I think, and I would love to hear your perspective on how we are kind of trying to make boys sit still and how they're not really biologically meant to do so. But can you talk about why this is normal? Why boys are meant to be out there slaying dragons and wrestling bears, and that being just their natural nature?
Oh, sure. Uh, boys boys naturally, and men do, have a pecking order. They want to figure out what the pecking order is, not just with friends, but with pretend creatures. And they're they need to come to a sense of what can I dominate and what can I not dominate. And it's physical. They need to know that they can have a pretend bear and they're strong enough to wrestle the bear to the ground. They're strong enough to take a stick and make sure the bad guys get dealt with. And this is just sort of a societal, it's not something that we put into them, it's something that's there. If you see two boys playing, they're going to start to figure out, okay, who is going to get the toys and who isn't, and they'll fight over toys. You don't want your boys fighting, of course. You have to sort of say share. But if you just let boys go on their own, they need to figure out what they're stronger than and what they're weaker than, even if it comes through imagination. But it all comes through play. It can't. Sometimes it can come through readings, fables, and stories. And people used to say, "Oh, don't let them read these old fables because they're scary." But the reason the fables are good is because boys could picture themselves in the story rescuing that person or slaying that dragon or finally getting that big, huge monster to die. You know, they're not going to become violent people. This is something they have to work out
Mm,
for themselves. And it picking up a stick and playing with a stick and pretending they're shooting a bird out of a tree doesn't mean they're going to be a hunter and that they hate people and they're violent. This is the working out of their sort of, what can I dominate and what can I not dominate.
mm,
And it doesn't mean they're going to grow up to be a domineering person. This
mm.
is a developmental issue. You can also see men. Look at men who go to play tennis and they're 50 years old. They're going to be out on the court. I can beat you. I can. Women aren't that much, but there's something innate in a man that just wants to do that. And if we don't let our boys do that, we stifle them emotionally because they're going to find an outlet for it. Um, and girls just don't have that like boys do.
Mm.
We're competitive, but in different ways.
What are some ways that parents can harness this healthy competition in boys? Because, like you said, people might say, oh, it'll make him violent later or he'll be domineering later. And you're saying that's not true. So,
No.
what can parents do with boys who are, still little boys,
Yeah.
do to help harness that?
Yeah, I would encourage them for creative play. I would encourage whenever parents can take them camping or into the woods or
Mm,
paddling on a river, give them some kind of physical outlet where they can use their muscles and their mind, and they can allow their imagination to just kind of go wild. The building of the tree fort, that's a boy sort of taking his creative juices and energy and making something with it. Boys love to make things. So, even if it's Legos, sit down with your son and build things. And, that let them use their creative juices. And believe it or not, when they sit down and make things with Legos, they're doing different things than we think they're doing. They're building a garage to put their truck in after they make the truck. And the truck is going to drive a million miles an hour over your couch before it gets into the thing. And so that's the kind of stuff that they need to do. So I engage them in projects. The other thing that's interesting too, people say, well, don't let them with guns and don't let them with a stick pretending it's a gun. Um, but then they sit them in front of a video game where they can shoot people that blow up when they're 10. That makes no sense
yeah.
because, and then they see that vision over and over and over and over. How many parents let a 12-year old watch a PG-13 or an R-rated movie? A lot. Now I
Yes.
wouldn't, but there's violence in there and there's the sexual stuff. So this is a ruse. It really is. Boys need to be out there figuring out life, and it needs to be done through projecting and through movement.
Mm, so good. My son, he's 3, so he's a rough, wild boy, feral boy.
Mhm.
And sometimes he can be rough, for example, say with my mom, his grandmother. And, I know that you talk about physical play being a way of bonding.
Mhm.
How can we harness this in boys so that they are gentle when they need to be?
Yeah.
And also, when do we just let them be rough playing boys?
Yeah.
How do you balance that not only, as a professional, but as a mother yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think that when it comes to the point where they want to harm somebody, it's got to stop. For instance, a lot of 3-year-olds bite. Now, you can't have your son going around biting. So he needs to understand play is great, wrestle is great, but here's the boundaries. And you literally have to spell it out. No wrestling with grandma, no hitting
Mm,
grandma. Here are the rules with grandma. Here are the rules with mom and dad and friends. You can't bite, you can't hit. Everything else is fine. And to recognize what physical activity, um, it kind of depends on their intention, their intent. For
Yeah.
instance, a 3-year-old boy might pick up paintbrushes and start painting all over your wall. And you would scream, "What a horrible kid." No, he thinks that's lovely. So he's not, I had a kid do that. So he's not intentionally doing something bad or mean. He's just doing something that's not acceptable in your home. Now, if he goes up to your mother and bites her on the arm or hits her in the leg, he's either doing it for attention or he's doing it to be mean and to see how she's going to respond, because kids will test us all the time. So you have to set very, very, very clear rules and spell them out over and over and over and over, because kids who bite, it takes a while to get them out of the biting, but they will, but they'll never do it if they think it's harmless play. So it really comes down to the intent. And
Mm,
even if there's good intentions, but they're harming somebody, they need to realize that.
mm.
Yeah.
What does the research say about the differences in how girls and how boys respond to discipline and encouragement, emotional support? You talk a lot about this in your book. And how can parents who maybe have a boy and a girl, how can they adjust this for both genders?
Mhm. Well, I think that it's really more individual than necessarily gender related, because some boys, you will look at them and they will start to cry after they did something bad. Another boy who did the same thing, you'll say, "You need time out." And he'll look at you and go, "Come make me." Or you'll say, "I'm going to take away all these toys in your bedroom for a day." Make it two. That's what they'll do. And there's some girls that'll do that, but
Mm-hmm.
fewer. Boys tend to want to challenge your authority, and they want to look you in the eye, and they want to know if you mean it, because if you
Mm,
don't mean it, they're going to press you until you do mean it. Boys in particular need to know how far they need to push you until you really mean what you're saying. That's why parents get into the counting, because the kid knows that you're not going to do anything until you start to count, and count to 3 or 4 or 5. They know the number, and then they'll run and do what they're supposed to do. Girls in general tend to in general buckle much more quickly. They take it very personally. They get very upset, many, if they hurt you or they hurt your feelings. And so often with girls, you don't have to, they won't push the limits as much as boys will. But that's in general, because you can have a strong-willed girl who will push you until they know you're going to break. And smart kids will do that, and strong kids will do that. They want to know exactly where your tipping point is, and mothers is going to be different from dads, so they need to know how far
mm.
can they push you until you mean business, and
Oh,
until
that's
you're
good.
there, they're going to keep on going.
Mm,
So that's why I encourage parents, if you're going to discipline, boom, immediately. I'm not going to count. You need to go to your room. You need to go sit on the stairs, but I don't want to get there or haul them there, because the longer you take to give them the consequence, the longer you're going to take to give them the consequence. And then you're going to be so frustrated, you're going to start yelling at your kids.
so good. I noticed with my son, I have this timer that I purchased and just from Amazon. And if he, has a moment where he's disobeying and we need to correct it, I sometimes I have to physically manhandle him and put
Yeah,
him on the stairs. But I get this timer out and I say, "You're going to sit here for 2 minutes. You need to take some deep breaths. You need to reset." And if he sees that timer, that's all he needs. I
that's
don't
all he
even have to
needs.
raise my voice.
Nope.
I don't have, it's literally just that one thing that just he's immediately crying, immediately like, "Oh my gosh." And I think that, I look back to how I was as a little girl, and I was the former. I was much more like, "You better mean it because I'm going to push your button." So I
Yeah.
do think that there's so much wisdom in saying that every child is unique and
every
different,
child's
and
yeah every
yeah.
child is very different, and they need different consequences
Yeah.
too. What you basically have to do, it sounds mean, but it isn't really mean, is to find in your child where their Achilles heel is. What is it? This is particularly true with older kids, teenagers. What is it that they really want? What's the bargaining thing? Is it a phone? Is it television? Is it screens? Whatever. And they need to know, if you do this, this is what's going to happen, so that you don't, have to yell. I want to say something too to parents who are listening to us. Kids like the boundaries. Your
Hmm.
son likes being told when he crosses a line, "Oh, I have to sit at this, I have to sit on the stairs and I'm in my car and sob, and now the timer goes on." It makes them feel safe, because
Mm.
kids that don't have rules feel that they have too much power and too much control. And again, this is really true for boys. They need to know in the pecking order, you're on the top. Now, you're
Hmm.
not going to be a military sergeant, but you are the one who has control and you set the rules. And so they have to abide by them. And I can't stress that enough, because a lot of parents kind of want their kids to find their way and pick their way and make all the choices. That makes kids crazy. It really does,
Yeah.
because there's too many options and they don't have this psychological development, mental development to make a good choice. I mean, they'll hang themselves. I mean, they'll run into the street. They'll try to drive your car out the driveway,
Yeah.
and it's four. He knows how to turn the car on. So why not drive? They'll do really dumb things. And so it's
Hmm.
really important to set those boundaries and those rules early on and stick to them.
Yeah, that's so good. You talk also a lot about preserving boys' innocence
Hmm.
and why it's super important. And I think, just in our world, I mean, with social media and how much access kids have these days to material, pornography, things that are honestly downright, in my opinion, as a mother, terrifying.
Hmm.
What do you suggest to a parent on how to do so and why it is essential to preserve that
Yeah.
innocence
Yeah.
in young
Well,
boys?
you're absolutely right. And I do want to tell parents, and I will tell you, don't parent out of fear. There's a
Hmm.
lot of frightening stuff out there, but you have
Yeah,
every ability to keep your kid on the right track. I see it all the time. So don't be afraid.
that's
The
good.
biggest influence, we keep hounding it, is the internet.
Yeah.
The shorter the amount of time your son spends on the internet, the healthier he's going to be, because the internet is where a lot of the bad stuff happens. Okay, dating begins now through social media, and kids, boys and girls, will start looking at pictures of other boys and girls, making a judgment on that, and saying, "Well, I'd like to date you," or "I'm not going to date you because you look really ugly." And boys are very sensitive. "I'm not going to date you because you're too skinny, you look too weak," or so. This really happens, and we don't realize that this happens. The other thing too is that pornography finds boys. All they have to do is Google, and husbands, Google trucks, Google
Yeah.
engines, and the algorithm goes, "Oh, it's a boy," and they come at you. And usually it starts around 9 or 10, the kids that are on the internet. And so it's really important for your child, your son, have extremely good controls on your internet. When your son is on the internet, have him in a public place, have him where you can see it. Okay,
Mm.
in the kitchen, in the family room, where they are. Don't let them go take their laptop to their bedroom, even if they're 12 and they're a really good kid. It doesn't matter. The good kids are the ones I worry about the most, because they don't want to say no, and they want to explore, and they want to figure out what's going on. Preserving innocence for boys really means preserving a healthy sense of sexuality and their
Mm.
sense of sexuality. I'm a sexual being, I'm in charge of it. It's not going to be violated by other people, even through a screen, even by pictures and images. I'm not going to start having sex when I'm 14 or 15, because this is my sexuality. I own it. And also to protect their mind, get your kids reading books. Kids, even listening to audiobooks is okay, but if you get your kids interested in books, they're going to spend less time on bad stuff, less time googling and YouTubing dumb stuff, rather than reading a good book. So we're talking about preserving a healthy mind and preserving a healthy sense of self. And for a boy to preserve a healthy sense of self means being able to preserve a healthy masculine sexuality. And
Mm.
the more exposure he's given to stuff on the internet or other, older men, the worse it's going to be. And then the other thing is, I think, a peer group. Make sure, and this goes for girls too, make sure your kids are in a good peer group. Even if you have to switch schools. I've seen so many
Wow.
high schoolers get into trouble because they're hanging with the wrong crowd.
Hmm.
And if you see your son losing a part of himself and changing with, with a group of other boys and girls, um, change it.
Yeah.
That's how the most practical thing. And they're hard. And I know a lot of parents go, oh, I can't do that. Yes, you can. It's not that bad. Like you were saying at the beginning of the show, get over the hurdle. Because once
Yeah.
you're over the hurdle, it's not that bad. And guess what? Your friends are going to follow suit.
Yeah.
Because if your kid isn't getting a cell phone and being on the internet till they're 16, and they gave it to their kids at 12, and a bunch of your friends are now doing 16, the one who gave their kid internet access at 12 is going to start to be kind of embarrassed. And
Yeah.
so we need to push it. And by the way, there are a lot of watches, Gab and Gizmo now, that you can get that don't let kids on the internet. So
Mm,
they've got a lot of the communication. And then as they get older, you can increase their exposure. It's not all or none.
yeah. If your kid really needs a cell phone, they could get a flip phone. They still sell them at Verizon.
I know.
You
Yeah,
know,
they do.
it
Well,
still works.
kids feel pretty geeky with a flip phone.
I'm sure.
But you're right. They could do that, or a family phone. Have a family
Yeah.
phone. But again, they can have sort of a cool looking phone. It's just basically a phone.
Yeah.
And they can only talk to and call people that you say are okay for them to talk to.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of parents do want access, you have to pick kids up and so on and so forth. But there are ways to do it that are safer,
Mm-hmm.
than, but if a kid abuses his privilege with phones and so forth, out it goes.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I think I mean as someone who is a young parent, I have very intentionally picked my friends based on how they're also parenting. And I think
Yeah.
that's something too is once you become a parent, you realize that really the people that I want in my family's life around my kids, we've got to have a lot of the same values because it's not easy out there.
No.
And I think that just increases your chances of raising healthy, happy, good kids,
Absolutely.
you know?
So your good friends are more likely with your values to raise their kids similarly to you. And this is very interesting too, and it's been shown in studies. I was driving our son back to college, and he said, "What are you going to do tonight?" I said, "I'm going to talk to some parents." And he said, "What are you going to say?" And I said, "Well, what should I say?" And it was very interesting. So he's a sophomore in college. He goes, "That is so easy, Mom." He said, "First, tell them not to act like kids. No drinking parties at their house. Don't let kids
Ooh,
come over." I know.
that's
And
good.
then he said, this is interesting, make sure they have good friends. And I
Mm,
said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, because I always admired that you and Dad had friends that had your similar values, and I looked
mm,
up to them. So when I saw you, setting a boundary or rule, I saw that they would do it too."
mm.
And studies have shown if parents with good friends raise healthier kids because the kids look to your parents' friends to see your values supported. So
Wow.
so you're on to something. That's not just, kind of your experience. Research shows that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Your son is so wise. Look at that. Like a
Well,
sophomore in
he's a
college.
pretty good guy now. Yeah, he really is.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, part of the reason I wrote Boys Should Be Boys is because of this. I wrote a book about fathers and daughters, which was very, very popular, still is. But while I was researching it, I found that there was a lot more literature out there on how mothers were and women than men. And I thought,
Mm,
wait a minute. And a lot of the literature was very negative. If you look at the way men and fathers are portrayed in the media, very negative, stupid, drink too much beer, and
yes.
so on and so forth. And I go, well, this is disturbing. I wonder if this is trickling down to our boys. How are our boys feeling about life? Are they feeling the same as the 30, 35-year-old man? So I said, that's why I'm going to do some research because I didn't want my son to feel that when he hit 25 or 20 or whatever, that he was a doofus. I wanted him to feel good about who he was. And sure enough, I found there was much less research on boys than girls. So that's why
Wow.
wrote Boys Should Be Boys, to really give parents the permission to allow their sons to be masculine people
Mm-hmm.
there's all parts of masculinity on the spectrum, and yet feel good about unleashing that and not fighting it in boys, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very, very destructive. You know yeah, just quick anecdote, and you don't have to put it in the podcast if you don't. I had a patient come in, a little 2 year old, in its beautiful yellow smock dress. Me too, too. Then I kept talking to the mom about she's so cute. It's not a she, it's a boy. I said, oh, well, he's beautiful. She said, thank you very much. I said, can I ask you why you put him in a dress? He likes dresses. I said, ma'am, he has no idea what a
Oh
dress
my
and
gosh.
pants and this kind of stuff. So, and the reason I bring that up is if you try to, get your kid in a mold, you're really going to do a lot of damage because she was working against any natural instinct he had to pick up a truck and run
Yep.
it over the couch.
Yep.
You know,
Yep. And if you nurtured, it's there. I mean,
it's
wow.
there. It's
That's
there.
so
But you're
there.
but you're confusing the child
Yeah.
because wait a minute, what is this? So
Yeah. No, that's so good. And I think that your point about fathers, because what you're saying around how fathers are portrayed as, he's a drunk, he's lazy, he's this,
yes,
he's that. It's really, just unfortunate, first of all. There's so many good men in the world and who are fighting against so much just societally. So you advocate so much about, the role and the importance of the role of a father in your
yeah,
book, raising emotionally strong children.
yeah.
What unique difference or what unique influence does a dad have in a boy's life that
Yeah.
no one else can
Well, it's
replace?
enormous. I worked for a number of years with the NFL. And the
Oh, I love this.
reason is because many of them, many, not all, grew up without dads. And they were in pain. These adult, elite, highly paid athletes, tremendous pain. And when it came to parent, they had no idea where to start. They
Mm,
didn't know what to do with their daughters. They didn't know what to do with their sons. So they would articulate how painful it was growing up without a dad, a male figure. And and I often say boys need to see and to know what a good man looks like in order to become one. Because again, boys are visual people. They need a picture in their mind of how a good man acts, how he talks, how he treats other people, how he loves them as a boy. What is it like to feel love by a male if you're a young boy? If you don't have a dad, you never know that. They have
mm,
a real difficulty transitioning into manhood. They suspend boyhood for a long time because they don't know how to transition. Um, Also, for a boy, 7 and under is basically about mom. Mom's nurturing and loving and teaching. But then when they hit puberty, it's all about dad. They need they have a sense of physical power that's starting to come, and sexual power too, and intellectual power. They don't know what to do with that power, and they realize mom doesn't have that power. So what do I do with it? And I have seen a number of teenage boys physically harm their single mothers because they don't know how to constrain their physical power, their energy, their anger. And as one football
wow.
player said to me, he said, here we are, elite athletes. We get on the field, we are trained to do everything and live right on the edge of rage. Because I asked him, I said, why is it a number of you guys are horrible to your girlfriends and wives? Why do you beat them? Now, a lot of them don't. So I don't want to generalize, but I just asked some blunt questions. Go, oh, that's easy because we are paid millions of dollars to live on the edge of rage. We leave the field, we go home. We don't know how to turn it off. They don't know how to turn it off. A man shows them how to turn it off.
Wow.
And every teenage boy has that sense. They don't know how to control it. They don't know how to turn it off. They don't know how to be angry in a healthy, masculine way. And mothers can't teach them. We can say it, we can teach it, but it's almost like a younger boy needs to bang into an older man, kind of like that pecking order. Here's how far you go, 17-year-old boy. You can bang into me, and I'm 45. You're not getting past that. I had a mom whose son was awful to her and and I said, well, where's dad? And she said, well, he's gone a lot. Da, 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 da. And I said, well, you need to get dad on him because clearly you're not able to control him. which a lot of women will be offended by, but it's true. They know they're outpowered because boys can outpower their mothers. And so dad was home one day and he heard his son, who was 17, giving the mom a really hard time. Marched into the kitchen, and the son's a lot bigger than dad. Dad grabs him by the collar, pushes him against a wall, and said, "Don't you ever talk to my wife like that again." That was it. Kid
Whoa.
never badmouthed his mom again because dad said stop. And dad, maybe 5'11", and the boy was maybe 6'3", but dad pushed him against a wall. It was over. See, that's the power that a dad
Wow.
has in a son's life. But in addition to that, men who have never felt love from a father and a dad, they
Mm,
feel they're not worth it. They feel they're only worth mother's love. And in a son's life, when dad says something, and in a daughter's, it means something different than a mom says it, not
mm,
better or worse. Many kids feel, and this is from a kid's perspective, but I think everybody will understand what I'm saying because they were a kid once. If mom says, "Oh, you're going to do great. You can pass that test. You can pass that test." You go, "Yeah, I know, but you have to say that, mom." If your dad walks in and says, "You're going to pass that test," and walks out, who are you going to listen to? Your
wow.
dad doesn't have to say that. So if your dad decides to say that, part of us believes it more. Now that sounds chauvinistic, sexist, and everything, but everybody listening knows what I'm talking about.
It's true.
We feel moms have to be nice to us. Moms have to say nice things. Because if she comes in the kitchen and goes, "You're never going to pass that test. Don't even study." Well, it's kind of over, so we expect her to bolster us up. We don't always expect our dad to. So now if you're a 17-year-old boy and your mom's bolstering you up, that's great. She can help you get to the NFL, but you're always going to look for your dad in the stands.
Wow.
Always.
Ooh, that just gave me chills. What about single moms who
Yeah.
are raising boys?
Here's the good news. You can't be mom and dad at once. You can't. So stop trying.
Mm,
Single moms carry so much guilt and they're so exhausted because they're trying to be two parents. You can't. Be fine with being a great mom, and you can be a great mom and raise great kids. But here's what you need to do. You need to acknowledge you're not a man, and your son and daughter need male presence, male visual. They need to see again what a man looks like, who a good guy looks like and talks like and acts like. So if you have a son, if you have an uncle, a grandfather, a father, a coach, anybody, if they can spend time with your son and your daughter, great. Even if they can't, because that'll fill up part of that dad hole in there. If they can't, at least talk about him, bring him to
mm,
life. How would your coach respond? What would your uncle say? I know your uncle in California. Now, you want to go out on a date, you're 18 years old and you want to date a 14-year-old girl. What would Uncle so and so say? So bring him to life so that at least in their mind they have an image of how a good man behaves. And sometimes that's enough. But if you can help them have good, healthy male contact, wonderful. And there are a lot of places you can get it. A lot of kids can go to a youth group at a church, and they can go on a mission trip with a guy who's going to head the mission trip. A lot of good men are in doing a lot of good work with kids. So, use your judgment and find that if you can, but stop being hard on yourself because you're trying to be two people and you can't.
that's such good practical advice. What is a parenting mistake that you see when it comes to raising boys versus girls? And how can parents course correct?
Mhm. Um, I think in a lot of ways, dads in particular are tougher on boys than they are on the girls. They push their sons. They expect their sons to act older than they really are. Again, they want them to man up. They tell them, you know, don't be, a wuss. You shouldn't be crying like this. This is ridiculous. Don't take that. They don't do that to their daughters as much. And I don't think that's fair because they undermine their son's feelings I see this quite a lot. Stop crying, stop crying. Well, why should he stop crying? He
Mm.
hurts, I mean, this is, it's really okay to cry. Um, and the other, so as far as girls, I don't see dads do that as much as girls. Mothers can do that to daughters. Mothers can be, particularly your oldest daughter, mothers can bang heads a lot with their oldest daughter. Because if a mother was hard on
I'm
her,
the oldest daughter, so I'm like, checks out.
yeah, yeah. So you probably fought with your mother a lot more
Oh yeah.
than other sisters. There's similarities, but there's still this sort of competitive sort of nature a little bit. Also, there are parts of you that reminded your mom of herself, and
Mm.
she's fighting it, and she didn't want it, and you're reminding her of that. It's all subconscious. So she's trying to squash it. I do this with our oldest daughter. I was so much harder on our oldest daughter than any of the other three kids. We're very, very close, but we would butt heads all the time because we're very similar in a lot of ways, but different in other ways. And the similarities that we had that I didn't like in myself, I criticized in her,
Mm.
which isn't fair. It's not fair. So moms need to be listening to this. If you're butting heads and arguing with your oldest daughter, you need to look at what you thought of yourself at her age.
That's so good. What is a piece of advice, if you could give one piece of advice to a parent that's listening, what would it be?
Listen to your kids. We
Mm.
are terrible listeners. We are bent on teaching our kids lessons, telling them what to do so they stay on the right track, and making sure that all the ducks line up in a row. But what happens is our kids will, so we're constantly talking at our kids, we're trying to teach them. But one of the most important things we can do, I did this with my grandkids a little while, it was a blast. My granddaughter's in first grade. So I said, tell me what it's like to be Ellie and just talk to me. What's your world like? What are your friends like? What's your teacher like? First person, tell me what life is like living in your body and listen to what they say. Because kids are talking to you all the time through their body language and everything, but we're not listening. A lot of parents, I don't know why my kid acts that way. I don't know why they're having temper tantrums. Have you asked? No, I don't need to ask. They're just being a bad kid. Maybe not.
Wow.
Maybe they're struggling with something, and maybe you're being really stressful, and maybe you're yelling a lot at the house, and your kid's having a hard time saying, "Stop yelling, mom! Stop yelling!" You're going, "Oh, be quiet! You're being disrespectful." Maybe you need to listen to that kid. So that's what I would do. Periodically, ask your kid a question and shut your mouth and listen. Best parenting advice you're often going to get comes through your kids' mouths. And
Mm.
even start with something like that. What's it like being you at school, being you on the soccer field, and let them talk to you?
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I'm going to put that in my back pocket forever.
It's
That's so
fun.
good.
It really is fun. And you will learn so much about your child. Things will bother your child that you never knew. They will tell you what they think about before they fall asleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
They will
Yeah.
tell you what they think of another person or what a person wore that they didn't like, the things that you would never ever think of that they'll say to you.
Oh my gosh. Meg, you are just incredible. This book,
Uh-huh.
I mean, for me personally, has been so helpful, game changing in a lot of ways, just practical things. For everyone who's listening, please go pick up this book. You also mentioned that there's another book what was that other book you
Yeah.
mentioned?
Strong mothers, strong sons. And I talk about that very unique mother son relationship. And then, of course, I wrote Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters, that cross kind of relationship. And then wrote, 10 Habits of Happy Mothers. I've written a bunch of other books, but those are really fun books because those are the relationships that can be hard for us to navigate. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what does my son want? Why is he trying to get as high as he can in the tree and see if he can get up there and not fall out? Whoa, what do I do with that? Rather than say, don't climb, let him climb the tree. If he
So good.
breaks a bone, he breaks a bone. It's okay.
So good. I'm sure you've seen many broken bones in
Oh,
your
oh,
line of work.
if you're a parent of a son, you need to be friends with an orthopedist. You just do.
If you know any in Nashville, let me know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meg, thank you so much for being on the Trust Issues podcast. Your work is absolutely incredible. Where can our listeners come and find you and follow?
Go to meekerparenting.com. The fun thing that I'm going to be doing, Erica, in a couple of weeks is I'm going to be starting the Parenting Great Kids community.
Ooh, I
So
love
I'm going to
this.
jump in. People can sign up. I've got a lot of courses. I've got Ask Dr. Meg Library, and I'm going to come on and I'm going to be answering people's questions, putting out new courses. It's going to be really fun. I love writing books, but I don't get the exchange. I want the
Right.
exchange. I want to talk to you, Erica. Okay, what do you need? What's bothering you now? So that's they go to my website, meekerparenting.com. They'll find out about it, but it's going to be Parenting Great Kids community. So
I love that. That is so needed in our world. So we will make sure we link all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show.
you bet. Been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Wow, that episode with Dr. Meeker was incredible. Thank you for listening. If you loved this episode, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Make sure that you leave a 5-star review. The reason I ask that is just because when you do that, it actually tells the algorithm, the sneaky algorithm, that you like this content and you want more of it. And so therefore, it just shows this content to more people. So it just helps us get our message and our episodes out to more people. And I just appreciate it so much. And I truly believe that this conversation was so important, not just because I'm a mother of boys, but because I truly believe that men in this world need more support, and I want to be a part of that. So if you want to be a part of that too, share this out. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.